Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our final Excellence in Graphic Literature Awards 2020 Summer Book Club for this year. If it's your first time listening, we'd like to extend a very special welcome to you. The Excellence in Graphic Literature Awards is an award program for the very best graphic novels released each year and is a program of the Denver nonprofit Pop Culture Classroom. So this summer, we've been highlighting all of our young adult and adult winners in both the fiction and nonfiction categories through these really awesome book clubs. All of our previous book clubs are available online on Pop Culture Classroom's YouTube channel. That includes our book club for Kiss Number 8, which was our young adult fiction winner, and also the Mosaic Award winner, which highlights diverse and authentic voices. And that book club features its creators, Colleen A.F. Venable and Ellen T. Crenshaw. We also have our book club for King of King Court by Travis Dandro, which was our young adult nonfiction winner. And then we have our book club for The Hard Tomorrow, which was our adult fiction winner, and that features the author and artist Eleanor Davis. So my name is Matt Slater, and I'm the Education Program Manager here at Pop Culture Classroom, and also the Assistant Manager of the Excellence in Graphic Literature Awards, and I'm going to be your host for today's program. With me today, I have an amazing cast of creators and friends and colleagues, which I would love to introduce you to. First and foremost, we have the award-winning creator himself, Mr. Brian Fies. Brian, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be here.
Nice. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm a writer, cartoonist. I've had a lot of careers in my life. Really didn't become a professional cartoonist until I was in my early 40s. Actually, I'll talk about that a little bit in a bit, but it makes me kind of an old Methuselah in the field. But and I've talked about a fire story, my most recent book that I did after my house burned down. But I'm more or less a full-time professional cartoonist now, which is a rare and special thing to be able to say.
That's awesome. And again, thank you so much for joining us today, talking about your book. We're super excited to have you. We also have with us Mr. Matthew Galloway, who was the chair of our adult jury for the Excellence in Graphic Literature Awards. Matthew, how are you doing today?
Doing great.
Excellent. Why don't you tell it, when you're not reading tons and tons of books for the EGL Awards, what are you normally doing?
Well, I'm a librarian at Anythink Libraries, which is the library system for Adams County, Colorado. Though over the past year, I've been a little excessive with the awards committees. So I'm currently working on the American Library Association reading list, which is having me read hundreds of genre fiction books. So that one's a lot of fun.
Nice. You're just always reading. And then finally, we also have Faith Ojebuobo with us. Faith is a Pop Culture Classroom instructor and does lots of our outreach that we do at libraries and schools and community centers here across the Denver metro area. Faith, what's going on?
I think it's going okay. It's a Friday, so
yes. Hallelujah. Faith, when you're not teaching awesome pop culture and gaming things, what are you usually doing?
Oof, what am I not doing? I am working towards licensure as a mental health clinician here in Colorado. So I do I am a trauma-based clinician for those of you who want to know that. And then when I'm not doing any of those things, I am working on writing tabletop games and tabletop RPG games more specifically. So yeah, that's what I do a lot.
Nice. I just got into Pillars of Eternity. Crazy in-depth RPG. I think I'm a little out of my league, but I might have some questions later. But for all of you guys, we've got a great deep dive into a fire story planned for you all today with some really awesome insight from all of our panelists. Our program today is going to start with some words from Brian about a fire story and its creation. And then we're going to move over to Matthew to talk a little bit more in depth about the Excellence in Graphic Literature Awards and why a fire story was selected as the winner for its category. And then finally, we're going to move into our Q&A session, which is where you, our audience, gets involved. So if you are watching live right now on this beautiful Friday afternoon, you can actually participate with us in the chat like Susan from Facebook already did. Susan says, "Hi, Brian. I enjoyed using your book to teach English as a second language at Los Angeles City College." So that is awesome.
Oh, wow. That's very awesome.
Yeah. So,
thank you, Susan.
And that's part of what we're going to talk about today is kind of our educational, the Excellence in Graphic Literature Awards is all about using books in classrooms and libraries. So it's awesome to see that your book is already being used in those types of settings. But if you're watching live right now, no matter whether on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, or Twitter, you can leave your questions, your comments, your witty remarks in the chat. Specifically, if you think of a question for Brian or anyone else here on our panel, you can put that in the chat at any time, and we will answer it during our Q&A session later on in the program. And whether you're watching live right now or you're watching later on your own time, make sure to subscribe to the Pop Culture Classroom YouTube channel or subscribe to PCC on any of your social media channels. And that'll make sure that you are the first to know about any more of these awesome programs that we're running. And we hope to see you participating live in the next one. So with all that out of the way, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you, Brian, to tell us a little bit more about this amazing book and its creation. So I believe you've got some screen share, so just let me know whenever you are ready to go.
I just popped it up. Can you see that?
I can. Give me one moment here. Oh, nope. Hang on. The wonders of live presentations.
And we rehearsed this before, too.
I know. I had it before, and now it's gone. Okay, so it's showing me something else. That's why. Okay, Brian, we're going to go ahead and get you going. I don't have your video up there yet, but we'll get it there in just a moment. But we can see the slides that you're sharing with us.
Okay, great. Well, as first of all, thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for letting me be a part of it. It means a lot. As I mentioned in my little intro, I've got kind of a late start on professional cartooning. Like most cartoonists, I've drawn my whole life, wanted to be a cartoonist my whole life, and like most cartoonists, that didn't work out for me as a profession earlier in my life. But I kept my skills up. I drew, graphics for newspapers. I illustrated a light bulb catalog, and tried to be the best illustrator cartoonist I could through most of my life. When I was in my early 40s, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and I did a book about that, a graphic novel called Mom's Cancer. And that came about because I took my mom to chemotherapy one day. And if you or your loved ones have been through chemotherapy, it's kind of boring. The patient sits in a chair, they get the IV, they nap for a couple of hours. And I went with my mom that day, and while she was there, I just turned a piece of paper over and I drew this sketch of her in the chair. And I realized that this was how I was going to tell our family story. I was going to combine words and pictures in cartoons. That's the definition of a cartoon, words plus pictures, to tell our family story. So I went home and I started drawing, and I produced what became Mom's Cancer. It started as a webcomic, was published by Abrams Comic Arts, and really gave me this whole career that I've enjoyed ever since. It was well received. Mom's Cancer actually won an Eisner Award, and got some notice. Went kind of viral in the days when I guess the standards for viral weren't quite as big as they are now, but got a lot of attention online. So that kind of got me rolling. I did a subsequent graphic novel called Whatever Happened to the World of Tomorrow, which is about me growing up being a space age kid and getting to the age I am now and wondering, why am I not living on the moon with a jetpack? That's kind of what this book is about. It's about the arc of history from optimistic utopianism to pessimistic dystopianism. Why we used to think science would solve our problems. Now a lot of us think science is the problem. And so that's what that book's kind of about. I did follow that with a web comic called The Last Mechanical Monster, which was kind of a reminder to myself that comics can and should be fun. They can be serious and they can be for adults, but sometimes they just should be fun. So it's a story I did about an old man and his giant robot. I love it very much. And those three big projects are more or less the state of my cartooning career until the night of October 9th, 2017, when my wife and I went to bed and she woke in the middle of the night and we looked out the window and we saw this. This was fire coming over the hills to our house. We got up, we evacuated, we hit the road as quickly as we could. In about 20 minutes, we packed, our most precious things we could think of at the time. We missed a few, as it turned out. And this was the evening of what was later named the Tubbs Fire, for where it started. It was at the time the most destructive wildfire in California history. It has since been supplanted, which is not a record you want to see broken every year. This is what, I didn't take this picture, but this is what my fire looked like. Now those yellow lights in the foreground left, those are just overexposed street lights. But if you look back on the horizon, you can see breakouts of glowing orange. And of course, the big, looks like Mordor over there on the right. My house is right about in the middle of Mordor. So this is what the Santa Rosa Plain looked like the night of October 9th, 2017. I should say this is in Northern California, about an hour north of San Francisco, Sonoma County. So my wife and I evacuated. Our house burned up about 2 hours after we evacuated, we figured. But I didn't know that until later. The next day, I walked back into our neighborhood. The cops hadn't even had a chance to put up barricades yet. Nobody tried to stop me. The streets were deserted. I walked into our neighborhood, and this is what my street looked like that morning. And this is what my house looked like that morning. And you can still see some little fires burning back there, by the way. And I was an idiot. I'd walked out of our house the night before wearing sandals because of the first thing I found by the bed. So I'm walking around this fire zone in sandals with the pavement still too hot to touch,
Oh my gosh.
feeling like an idiot.
That gives me anxiety.
Oh yeah, try being there, buddy.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's striking how different when you see these pictures small in the book, they're so much more detailed, like here big, that we can see them now.
Yeah. Well, that's the front door of my house. That's a refrigerator off to the right, which is about the only recognizable thing left. I've got to say that even before I knew my house was gone, even as I was walking into my neighborhood and I wasn't entirely sure what the extent of the damage was, I knew I had to write about this. I knew I was going to make a graphic novel out of it, or at least a comic. I was going to make some kind of comic about it because that's my medium. I'd already had the experience of telling a serious nonfiction story with mom's cancer. And so the idea of telling a story about my house burning down in the form of a comic was not that alien to me. It was, I've always kind of gone through life feeling like I'm observing myself going through life. So even as I'm walking down these streets, these, ravaged streets, I've got a second set of eyes over my back, watching me watch it and observing and taking pictures like this that I knew I'd use later to make drawings from, because I knew I was going to tell this story. I felt compelled to tell this story. I know I was an eyewitness to an historic event. And, my first job out of college, I was a newspaper reporter, and I kind of felt that journalism thing kick back in of, I saw this, I've got to talk about it. And so the next day I went actually to a Target store, and I bought shoes because I was wearing the stupid sandals, and I bought some shirts, and I bought some pants and some food and some other things, and I bought art supplies. This is all the art supplies I could find at a Target store, which is this really crummy paper and the 4 color highlighters and a couple Sharpies. I stole the pencil from my daughters, and I started drawing. And within 3 days, I'd drawn 18 pages of what I'd seen that morning, what had happened to us. I drew the start of a fire story, and those pages looked like this. Now, if anybody out there is a cartoonist who's drawing something, I hope they'll be impressed by the fact that I drew 18 pages in 3 days, particularly when I was doing other things. This was not the most important thing I was doing at the time.
And again, you said this is like the morning after, right?
Yeah, I started the day after.
Yeah.
As soon as I got back from Target, I started writing and drawing and doing this. So I'd taken these pictures, and I turned the pictures into drawings of melted fire hoses in the street, and a neighbor boy's destroyed basketball hoop, and my house. Oh, I'm sorry, my mailboxes. Those are my mailboxes melted on the corner. Mine was the one in the lower right. And I actually pried it open with a crowbar later to see if there was anything in it. There wasn't. And then this is my house. In the trees up on the left there, you see some some stuff, some debris up in the trees. That's actually fragments of my neighbor's metal roof that got caught up in the wind like a tornado and landed in my tall trees. You can see the refrigerator there. My car's off to the right in the garage, and that's about it. So I started drawing these pictures like you see on the right. Quick and dirty, not my best work, but I recognize it has a urgency, an authenticity of being done, kind of in the moment. And like I had with mom's cancer, I didn't know what to do with these things. So I just started putting them online. I have a blog. I put them on my blog. I went on Facebook and I told my friends, my house burned down. Here's how it happened. So I started this. That entry is dated October 13th, but I actually did started posting them earlier than that. I posted them. Our house burned down on Monday. I started posting pages on Wednesday. On Monday, my house disappeared. And this also went viral. This caught on. Something like in the next 2 weeks, something like 700,000 people went and read this web version of a fire story. And, I'll take some credit for that. I think I did a good job of telling our story, but I also think people were like hungry or thirsty for this information. I had a lot of people across the country, around the world, write me and say, I saw your fire on the news. I saw the mushroom cloud rising over California, but your story was the only thing I saw that made me feel what it was like to be there. Mm. And that was the point of doing it. That's its purpose, is to give you an on-the-spot report of what it was like to be there. So, like I say, about 700,000 people read this. A San Francisco PBS station asked if they could try animating it. I said, knock yourselves out, because I'm not going to animate it. So I sent them all my art files, and they did a kind of a video, a 6-minute animated video of it that PBS picked up. NPR picked up, and many, many, many people saw that. And as a result of all of that, and following all of that, weeks later, I got a email, a really nice email from my editor at Abrams, Charlie Kochman, who'd published my previous 2 graphic novels. And he said, no pressure, Brian, but if you ever want to turn that into a book, we'd love to publish it. And I said, you're on. and that led to the book we're here to talk about, A Fire Story. And I really looked at the full-length graphic novel as a chance to do a lot of things I hadn't had a chance to do with the webcomic. And this gets a little in the weeds or a little inside baseball, but when I did the webcomic, I drew it and wrote it knowing people would probably be watching it on a little phone. So the lettering is enormous. The lettering is giant, because I figure if you're watching on a screen that's big, that is that big, you want to be able to read it. So the lettering's enormous. The art is spontaneous, let's say, instead of terrible, let's call it spontaneous. So I knew I'd have to rewrite it. I knew I'd have to redraw it. I have to kind of rejigger the whole thing. And I wanted that opportunity because in my mind, the webcomic was like a rough draft for what I thought the story might eventually become.
That's incredible that even at that moment you had enough foresight to think people will look at this on their phones, therefore the text needs to be like, the fact that thought even went through your mind is amazing to me.
I might not be hooked up right. But yeah, I mean, that's real important. Again, it wasn't my first rodeo. I had the same thought with Sure. Mom's Cancer, because Mom's Cancer book is horizontal. It's wider than it is tall, like a landscape format. And the reason it's like that is because those are the proportions of a computer monitor, and I knew people would be reading it on a computer.
At first. So interesting.
I didn't know it ever be published, so it actually caused us some trouble when it came time to put it in print. But yeah, if I have any advice to cartoonists who are doing anything, doing a webcomic or something, it's always think ahead to how your work might be used in the future. Work at as high a resolution as you can, and even if you don't think there's a chance of print, think about print, think about posters, think about billboards, think about whatever you want to think about.
I hope you guys are taking notes out there. This is great for you.
Prepare for that. So prepare for that.
Yeah.
So you can see a comparison here between, the original webcomic on the left and what it became on the right. I wanted the story, I know I'd have to redo it all, but I wanted the story to retain sort of the same feel of the webcomic. That was real important to me. So the published book has a very limited palette. I think I used 6 or 7 colors in it, including in this page, orange and gray. And I didn't use markers on the published version, but I wanted to have the same feeling as if I had used markers. So obviously, one colors books these days in Photoshop, but I wanted this streaky monocolored effect to I didn't want to make it too pretty. I didn't want to make it too pretty because the story wasn't pretty to start with, and it's kind of an ugly story. So I took the opportunity to turn what had been half pages into full pages and draw things a little neater. But again, I didn't want to overdo it. I didn't want to over render anything, make it too pretty. And again, I still wanted to retain that kind of feel that, it had been drawn with a marker, even though in print it hadn't. And I also wanted to take for the book, the webcomic covers a week or two that is just entirely about my family, a little bubble about me and my family in a small amount of time. And I knew if I was going to write a book, turn into a book, I wanted to expand that. I want to talk about more people. I want to talk about a longer time. So I took the opportunity to expand the story and talk about us, for example, leaving the city, evacuating from the city and driving south 30 miles to move in with our growing daughters for a month. And my wife and I were just talking about this literally 2 days ago. Every time we drive past this spot in the road, we always remember looking up and seeing that hotel on the hill on fire. It was just the strangest. Like I say, it felt like you were driving through a medieval siege. I wanted to talk to more people because I realized that my perspective, whatever it was limited by where I lived physically, geographically, and my socioeconomic situation, which was kind of, middle classish. So I wanted to talk to people who lived in other places, people richer than me, people poorer than me. And so I just went out and I interviewed people, some who were friends of mine and some I just discovered. And I told their stories in their own words in a fire story. So, the gentleman who left, Mike Harkins, is a friend of mine, was a friend of mine before the fires. And he tells a remarkable story about trying to save his entire block with a garden hose and managing to save probably single-handedly saved many houses, except he couldn't save his own. It's just I love these other people's stories. In my opinion, these other people's stories are the best part of the book because it's just you see people's different reactions to it, and you also see the similarity of people's reactions to it. We all have different stories, but there are these commonalities that really struck me as I was hearing these other folks' stories. I want to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about the environmental aspects of this. So I talk about California drought and climate change and California geography and how that contributed to this sort of perfect storm of conditions that led to this disaster. And I'm not going to read these pages to you, but you get the idea that I'm talking about, the hills drying out in the sun after 10 years of drought and the trees weren't entirely healthy and that kind of thing. I want to talk a little bit about the science of the fire because, I was a physics major when I was a science writer for 10 or 12 years. So my genuine experience of the fire was coming back to my burned out house and saying, oh my God, this is horrible. But there are some parts of this that are actually really interesting to me, just purely scientifically. So I talk a little bit about, the different temperatures that things melt at because I saw these things in my yard, in my house, and said, all right, so a glass lamp melted. How hot was the fire to melt a glass lamp? A bronze trophy melted. How hot was the fire to melt a bronze trophy? I find these things curious and interesting, and the sort of the science of it. I came back and everything metal was rusted. After one day, after one night, after the fire, everything was rusted, and I got very curious about that. How did it rust? It wasn't raining. There was no moisture, and it's these chemical processes that happen in extremely hot fires. I had no idea. So I want to talk about that a little bit, just because that was interesting to me. So, um, that was sort of my intent with the book, was to expand the story in time, expand the story in space, talk to more people than outside my family. I talk in the book about how in a disaster like this, your bubble starts very small. You and your family, your immediate needs of shelter and food and taking care of yourselves. And then over time, as you get that settled, the bubble expands. It grows to encompass your neighbors, and it grows to encompass your friends, and it grows to encompass people who live maybe 20 or 30 miles away, and then the whole San Francisco Bay Area, and then the whole state. And after a while, you're in this kind of bubble of people who've been through this thing and share this common experience. And I wanted the book to reflect that too. I wanted the book to expand the webcomic in the same sort of way. So the last page of A Fire Story, I don't think this is a spoiler, is I drew a picture of these daffodils that popped up in our yard months after the fire. Daffodils came up. And I never, ever tell someone how to interpret my work or tell them what I think the meaning of my story is. But if a reader wanted to look at this picture and get some notion of life rising from death, or hope rising from hopelessness, or, birth and renewal, if somebody wanted to put that interpretation on this drawing of the daffodils, I would not dispute that finding. I think that's a good reading. That's a legit reading of my book. So the book came out, and that's the book you read, and that's the book that you honored with the Excellence in Graphic Literature Award, and I appreciate that very much. But there's more.
Oh.
Yeah, my publisher Abrams is actually planning to put out a paperback version, a paperback edition of A Fire Story.
Okay.
And it was supposed to come out this fall. It's supposed to come out next month, but COVID pushed everything back. The spring books went to fall. Fall books like mine went to next spring. So fall of 2021, there's going to be a paperback edition of A Fire Story. And I asked my editor if he would mind terribly if I added 16 pages of new story to the book. I don't know if you know how, or I'm sure many people don't know how books are put together, but it's very convenient when you do a book if the number of pages is a multiple of 16. So if you look at your favorite books, if you actually counted not the page numbers, but the number of sheets of paper in the book, it's almost always some multiple of 16, because that's just how books are glued and stapled and sewn together.
Sure, yeah.
So I asked my editor, can I do 16 pages? He said, you bet, because then we can put a sticker on the front that says new and improved.
He was just glad you made it easy for him, right?
Yeah, he was happy to hear that. And so I started drawing that. And about that time, my neighborhood, my city, was threatened by another fire called the Kinseki fire in October 2019, 2 years after the fire that destroyed my house. And we came through that okay. We personally did. A lot of people didn't, but I personally came through that okay. But I called my editor and I said, I need 16 more pages, and I know how the story is going to end now. So the paperback version will have 32 new pages of content that takes it up through that Kinseki fire that almost but not quite destroyed my house a second time. And so this daffodils here is the last page of the hardcover. The first page of the new material is 2 years passing, and those daffodils bloom and they wilt and they bloom and they wilt, and 2 years goes by. And so I just want to show a few new pages from the book that talk about our life after the fire. Well, value added? I don't know.
Yes, this is awesome.
Cool. So it's about our life after the fire, and the rebuilding process and the insurance process and all the stuff you got to go through that, if we knew what we knew then, if we knew then what we know now, maybe, I don't know if we would have done it. So, here's my wife Karen and I sitting at home one day, and we just have a conversation about things that set us off, after the fire. So Karen and I are even keeled. I'll read this because I know some people might not have a big screen. Karen and I are even keeled, but there are still post-traumatic stimuli that can shoot a potent dose of adrenaline into our bloodstreams. Karen says, wood smoke. I say sirens. Karen says, strong wind. I add, especially strong, dry wind from the east, which is what we had that night. Karen says, roaring sounds. I reply, traveling the same route I walked home the morning after the fire, which still just gives me the willies. Karen says, helicopters at night. I say reminders of the 2017 solar eclipse that the girls and I drove to Oregon to see. It had nothing to do with the fire, but it was so close in time, they become entwined in my mind. And coincidentally, today that we're recording this is actually the 3rd year anniversary of that solar eclipse.
Oh, wow.
Totally coincidentally. Karen said, and she'd never told me this before, she said, the Macy Gray song Beauty in the World, which I cried to in my car every day so I wouldn't cry at work. I said, the Toy Story movies. I lost my childhood teddy bear in the fire. I know he wasn't really alive, but he was when I was 3. And that's absolutely true. You know, we went to see, I think it was Toy Story 4, back when we could see movies in theaters. And it just destroyed me. It just destroyed me because I let my Buzz and Woody die in a fire, you know? and I can't watch Toy Story movies anymore. Karen says escape routes. Again, this is something that she never told me. Every room, every hotel, every city, I always make sure I have a way out. It's a weird set of triggers, but manageable. We're still, I don't think this stuff leaves you. I don't think, you know, I think we're going to have some triggers our whole lives. So the book comes out, and I do a book tour, and I meet a lot of people on the book tour, and a lot of people have stories, but this one particularly moved me. I met a lady whose house burned down. Well, I'll just read it. I met other fire survivors who share my irrational shame that I let down history. And this lady told me a story. She said, I was the keeper of my family's past. I had everyone's antiques from the old country, all their treasures. Some of them were more than 400 years old. My great-grandparents packed them up, brought them to America, carried them across the country, and entrusted them to me. And I let them burn. And I said, you know, there's nothing you could have done. And she said, it doesn't matter. It happened on my watch. In the chain of posterity, we were the links that broke. And I feel exactly the same way. I feel like that my family's whole history is just going to have this discontinuity, this spot in time where everything disappeared. And that's my fault. It's my fault. And there's nothing I could have done about it. I know that rationally, but it's my fault. And I'm going to live with that. Now, this is the last page I wanted to share. Kinseki is the centuries-old Japanese art of repairing broken ceramics with gold. Instead of trying to hide damage, Kinseki highlights and celebrates it as part of the object's history. I have a deep appreciation for Kinseki as I watch my neighborhood rebuild. Some survivors want all evidence of the fire erased, plowed under, paved over, painted away. I understand, but disagree. I like my warped and rusted iron gate and the spots where our burning trash cans melted the street. Using occasional small reminders don't bother me. They tell our story. They're the scars we earned, our Kinseki. So that's a preview of the upcoming paperback edition. That's me in Denver at the Pop Culture Con last year, where I was honored and pleased to be a special guest. It was so much fun. So thank you for that too. And you run the program, but I'd be happy to take any questions or, you know, discussion or whatever you like.
Yeah. So a great reminder, Brian, if you could stop sharing your screen for us, please.
I will.
Thank you. Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Like the poetic nature with which you tell such a personal story, and then bringing us those extra pages is just gravy on top, and you continue that poeticness throughout all, even these new pages that are coming. So I'm definitely going to have to pick up a copy. So anyone watching live, like Brian said, if you've got any questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat now. We'll get those answered. I do want to kick it over to Matthew for a little bit, because speaking of that poetic nature of your book and all of those, like the amazing quality that you bring to a great story on its own, but the way that it's told just elevates it so much. Matthew, if you want to talk a little bit more about what it was like judging this book, judging for the Excellence in Graphic Literature Awards.
Hey, you know, it was just fantastic to work with this committee of people that come from sort of similar but very different backgrounds. So, you know, there were other librarians on the committee, but who work in totally different kinds of libraries. So they have a completely different perspective on what's going to work for their communities. There are educators, there's, you know, just pop culture experts. And so, you know, we just all have something different to sort of bring to the discussion of this really varied stack of books that we got to compare and choose from. Um, After seeing Brian talk, I'm pretty sure all of you can see why this was our top choice. It can speak to so many different people for so many different reasons. But I one of the things that spoke to me personally was before I was in Colorado, I lived in Oklahoma for a few years, and we're in Tornado Alley. So while I luckily did not have my house destroyed, I did get to go through a tornado that bounced all over my neighborhood. So down the street, one building is completely leveled. Next door, the backyard fences are torn down. The one across the street, the roof is gone, and it's just, there are life is unexpected. And when these
Could I interject? Do you
Yeah,
mind?
go on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really happy. I'm not happy. I'm gratified you say that, because I actually, after the book was published, or even back in the webcomic, when it was a webcomic, I heard from people who hadn't been through fires, but they've been through tornadoes, they've been through hurricanes, and they said, my disaster was different from yours, but you told my story too. Because there's just something about losing everything in a couple of hours that people react the same way. They got the same problems. They go through the same stuff. And so a fire story, sort of to my surprise, turned out to be even more universal than I thought it might be, because anybody who's been through something really tough like this sort of comes out of it with the same sort of shock and feeling and reaction, and what are you going to do tomorrow kind of thing.
Well, and I think that's it's made even stronger by the way you tell your story. Like you talked about how you bring in the science and you brought in the climatology and you brought in these interviews. You have so many different scopes, different levels to this story that people can enter it pretty much anywhere they want to. Whether they were like the person you talked about who just saw it on the news and wanted that personal touch, or whether you were someone right there in the middle of it all. It's just, I don't know, it's just such a brilliant creation, the way you did that. And the cast of characters, by bringing in those extra interviews, that gives people even more places to hold on to find themselves in the story. All those different reactions. And you talk about the shock of losing everything, but you put in so many small moments that you never think about unless you've been through something terrible.
Yeah.
Things that pop into my head are like when you talk about running into someone else at the store and you know exactly that they've gone through it too because of what's in their cart. Just the random things that set you off. It's such a human story that I think not only helps people who've been through things, but also kind of prepares us in a way for what life might throw at us in the future.
I like that insight. Thank you. That hadn't really occurred to me, but I appreciate that. Thanks.
Sorry, I've kind of lost my train here.
No worries.
Let's see.
Well, Matthew, while you kind of gather your thoughts there, we do have a question from Susan on Facebook. It's directed at Brian, but I would really love to hear, Faith, your input on here too, with your background in mental health. Susan asks, my students and I had just finished reading your book when our lives were turned upside down by the COVID-19 pandemic in March. What parallels would you draw between your experience losing your home and our new reality?
It's a tough question because it's a different kind of slow moving disaster, but I think there's a feeling of loss. I think the big commonality in my mind is the feeling that the world kind of looks the same, but it's turned upside down. Like everything's different, even though everything is still kind of the same. I think that's very disorienting. That feeling of just being out of sorts, being dizzy, being like you woke up in the wrong universe today, kind of thing. I think that's very universal. But it's a different disaster. I mean, COVID is slower moving. It's unless you or yours are directly affected, it doesn't. Well, I was going to say it doesn't impinge your daily life, but that's not true. It impinges on all of our daily lives every day. That's why we're having this Zoom call instead of meeting in a hallway in Denver.
Yeah.
Good question. There's similarities and differences. I think there's a deep similarity in sort of the trauma and loss of balance involved.
Yeah, I would absolutely like expand on that. I think we've talked about how there's this universal, like this universality of a fire story, and that there's this. I think all of us can understand grief and loss, and that we are having like this shift of what was normal. And right, like normal for a fire story is like I had a house and I had this neighborhood and I had all of these things that I visually could see, and this was normal. And that's kind of what COVID has been like for us, right? We've all had society where it was normal to, hug someone in public, or to like go and hang out with friends and play games, or, go bowling or do these social activities. And uh, all of those things have changed for us universally. So a lot of us are grieving our lives that we had before COVID and grieving the loss of all of that. And so I think that that's something we can all take in, right? Like I know personally, I lost a coworker most likely to COVID in one of my place, in one of the places I work at, and it was really awful. And so there's like this personal, like physical understanding of what's going on that I might have that maybe someone else doesn't have. And so I think a lot of us are reeling with this idea of like knowing that there's like people who are physically losing other people or their own lives to this, while also knowing like that it's not the same for everyone else because not everyone's being touched in the same way. And then we're also like grieving what we had before. And so I think we're all starting to feel that way, and a fire story can kind of help put that into words for a lot of us.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I think grief is the key there. We're mourning losses of different sorts. You know, I think of my life as being divided into a few periods of before and after. Like, for example, there's before my kids were born and after my kids were born. That's a clear dividing line in my life. On that date, my life changed. It would never be the same. The fire was a dividing line in my life. Before the fire, after the fire. That's like BC and AD for me. I think COVID is like that for a lot of people too. There's before pandemic and after pandemic, and you're you may we our life after the pandemic is always going to be changed because of that clear demarcation.
Yeah, Brian, one of the many remarks that you made in the book that stuck with me, one specifically I remember was about the keys, and you talked about when will I ever be able to? I don't know when I'll be able to take those keys off the ring, right? Another one that you mentioned, kind of in line with this thinking, is there was a line about you were self-aware enough to know that you were going through trauma at the time, but it didn't necessarily help you know, knowing that you were going through trauma didn't necessarily help you know how to deal with it. So again, kind of for Brian and Faith, now looking back, what sort of advice would you have for someone that was going through, and of course all traumas are different, but who knows that they're going through something life altering, like if you have any advice for someone like that?
You first, Faith.
Okay. Um, this is my area. I know this. So I think my first thing that I would tell everybody is to be kind to yourself. Right? Like, if you had a friend that was going through something horrible, you wouldn't tell them that they were bad or that there was something wrong with them for feeling this way. You would do whatever you could to support them and care about them. So I think the first thing and like the most obvious thing is to do that for yourself, like you would for everyone else. So to not be hard on yourself when you're not doing the things that you want to do, or not feeling that way, or not feeling like things are normal, because it isn't. And so I think understanding that is really important. The other thing that I would tell you is that we know that stress and anxiety really affects our body. And the best way to kind of deal with that is exercise and physical activity. So go take a walk, go out, like go outside when you can, like be out in the air and do some of those things, because that will absolutely help you feel better. And then, of course, my other thing is that if you're really struggling and you're doing all these things to take care of yourself and you're still not getting that support you need, seek therapy or seek someone to talk to, seek someone to support you, because all of us are feeling stressed and scared and worried right now, and it's absolutely okay to feel that way.
I absolutely, I agree completely, and I think I understand that you're going to have the feelings and allow yourself to have the feelings and acknowledge the feelings. I say in the book that, and it's still true to this day, almost 3 years after our fire. Some days my wife and I will just look at each other and just say, "I'm just having a crappy day. I'm just really sad today," and the other one of us, we've both said it at different days, hardly ever the same day, thankfully. But the other one will just say, "Yes, I get it. Please have a crappy day," because you can't fix it. You can't fix it. Just acknowledge the feelings and know you're going to feel bad, and there's a good reason you feel bad, and you're just going to have to feel bad, and then don't wallow in it, but just acknowledge that, yes, I'm having a really bad day. This is the worst thing that's happened to me. And I also think, I had a second point and it's totally fled me now, but I was going to say something else. It's gone.
Well, I'll add to that because you were talking about kind of this idea of grief and having bad days. And so I have had the example to me of it's like your grief and all of these things, it's like a ball in a box. And the ball gets smaller and smaller as time passes because we start to heal and we start to feel better. But there is like this button in the box somewhere. And every once in a while, that ball will hit that button. And that's like the trigger, that thing that gets us, that thing that makes us feel really bad. And so it's okay when that happens, right? Because it's a ball. It happens randomly. It's not our choice. Like just certain things are going to happen that cause it to happen for us. And so it's okay. And we can also see that it's representative of healing, even if we have a few bad days. And some days they're going to be a lot of, usually at the beginning, and then a lot less as time passes because we start to get better and we start to heal. So
yeah, it's like those triggers, Brian, that you mentioned with those new pages that you had. I'm sure there's some days that have many of those triggers and some that have fewer, just randomly.
Well, as we talked about before we went on air, right now I'm surrounded by wildfires, east of me and west of me, and my house is going to be fine. But there's ash falling from the sky like snow right now outside my window, and that's pretty triggering. That takes me back. And I don't mean to make any light of it because right now I have friends out there who I'm pretty sure are losing their houses in these fires, which is just horrible and heartbreaking. But I remember my second point, which is also acknowledge too that you're sort of you're not going to get back to your old life entirely at all. There's not a do-over. You're not going to get to your old life. You just have a new life now, and you're going to get through it as best you can. And I have a page in the book where I talk about this idea of closure and how violently I react to any hint that, oh, do you have closure now? Do you want closure? Are you getting closure? If anybody says the word closure to me, I'm going to punch them in the nose because it just no, there's no closure. There's no closure. The wound kind of scabs over after a while, but no, you don't fix that. I don't think it goes away. You live with it, and like Faith said, over time you kind of empty that box, except for that little ball in there that still once in a while comes up and just hits you really hard in the forehead. Mm.
Well, we've got about 10 minutes left in our program. So anyone watching live, this is your last opportunity to get any questions answered from Brian or anyone else here on our panel. I want to talk a little bit about, we touched a little bit on using this book in the classroom or in library settings. Matthew, I know this is your wheelhouse. And Brian, so kind of to both of you, what ways can you see this being used in a classroom or library setting? Or what ways would you like it to be used?
I think the most obvious thing is just that you've provided so many different ways that someone could tell their story by using all of your different, techniques within the book. So there's a lot of ways for people to write through their own pain or trauma and hopefully help themselves out. But I also think that your book is just such a deeply compassionate book, and it really shows the power of community and the power of even just small actions, like when you were sent the artist tools or getting comped a meal. Like by reading the book, you can really see just how important it is to be kind, and just even if you don't think you can do much, you can do something, and it may become something that is important enough to be remembered and thought about by someone. So I'm in that sense, it's a great book on just sort of helping to educate people to be empathetic and to have confidence that they make a difference.
Yeah, empathy must be explicitly taught, right? That is something that we have to explicitly teach our students. It's, some have it more ingrained than others, but if we don't teach it in schools, we're going to miss out on that opportunity. And so I think that's a great way is teaching other people's stories. But Matthew, you also mentioned that there's so many different techniques within the book. Brian, one of my favorites was the interludes of a day in the new life. And it almost seemed like those interludes could be composed into their own like web series, web comic, and just kind of live on their own. But I love the way that you kind of structured those into the story, and it really, from an educational perspective, it definitely shows the difference between short form storytelling and long form storytelling, and the effect that each of those different mediums can have, right? So Tim has a question here. Yeah. Tim has a question
actually,
here. Oh yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I actually thought of those day in the lives as little 4-panel comic strips, like a newspaper comic strip.
Mm-hmm.
Just 1, 2, 3, 4, like a peanut strip, little story. But I appreciate that, Matthew. Thank you. And we'll get to Tim's question, but I want to add to what Matthew said is I think one reason I think comics, the medium of comics, not just the way I do it, but the medium of comics really encourages that empathic response.
Mm.
When a comic, the combination of words and pictures is very powerful. And when a comic is really working right, it's like a direct tap from the creator's head into the reader's head without them having to think too hard about what they're reading. It's like there's no filter, there's no interpretation. It's just like direct telepathy between the two of you. And when a comic's really clicking, I don't think there's any medium that beats it for developing that empathy, for putting the reader in the writer's shoes.
Yeah, seeing those facial expressions helps so much. So Tim asks, and this will be our last question for today. Tim asks, how do you get over the fear that this will happen again? I have fire. He says, I have a fire 10 miles from my house right now. I'm not in any danger, but if I were, I can't think of anything I could change to make home safer. Defensible space. He said there's no vegetation near the house. Seems worthless when fire is jumping freeways. It's a hopeless feeling. So his question there is, how do you get over the fear? I mean, that's a kind of a question itself. How do you get over fear? But how do you get over the fear that this might happen again?
I don't. I'm terrified. I mean, if I were genuinely terrified, I wouldn't have rebuilt in the same spot my old house was at. I mean, our rationale was that our neighborhood suffered a once in a century fire, and so we're playing the odds of well, okay, we got a century. All the fuel that might burn is gone now, so it'll take 30 or 40 years for those trees to grow back. So you can rationalize it to yourself, I think. But as I said, the Kinseki fire in 2019 came way too close to us, and we were terrified. But at the same time, I've got to say we're getting real good at evacuating. It's not a skill you really want to develop, but I think you don't get over the fear, but you can develop ways to compartmentalize and manage it. You can develop a plan. You talked about clearing the brush around your house. Great. Fireproofing your house as best you can. Have a go bag. Have a plan. Have one place where all your important papers are that you can grab and go. Think about these things ahead of time. And if you can, rehearse them with your family. And I would recommend, if you want to rehearse an evacuation with your family, do it in the middle of the night in the dark, because that's what we were doing. We're running around with flashlights. It's entirely different. It's so disorienting. Wake up in the middle of the night and not have electricity. Trying to get out of your house in the dark is a whole different experience. But even just having a plan, just saying, and it's simpler the better. It doesn't have to be complex because it's got to be simple enough to remember in a crisis when your brain's totally fuzzy and panic. Um, any plan is better than nothing. Any plan is 100% better than nothing. So have a plan and, talk it over with your family and rehearse it. And I think that's the best you can do.
Yeah.
It gives you some illusion of control. The plan gives you an illusion of control. Well, I am not entirely at the whims of the fates when I have a plan.
Right. I love that. Yeah, but definitely because in any sort of emergency you won't be thinking as clearly. So having that plan sounds really important. Susan has one last comment for us. She says, what I found powerful is the use of visual metaphors such as the astronauts orbiting a black hole. Some are drawn into the black hole and destroyed, and some are completely thrown out of orbit, and others tenuously hang on. I think this use of a visual image is particularly meaningful for readers. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, there's so many of those really great visual images, the poetic language that just really combine to make such a powerful and emotionally accessible book. So, Brian, thank you for your vulnerability in telling this story and just putting yourself out there, because I know it's going to be helpful for so many other people and resonate with so many other people as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan and Tim, for the questions. I appreciate it very much. Thanks.
Yeah. So everyone, whether our cast members here or whether you're watching us live, thank you so much for joining us today. First, before we sign off, I want to go around our cast and see what sort of projects are you working on. What do you have to plug, whether it's a personal project or someone that you want us to support? Let's see, Brian, we'll start with you.
Well, as I said, I've got the paperback edition of a Firestore coming out next spring. I'm actually working on a new graphic novel that I hope will be out in the fall of 2021, but I can't talk about it yet because we haven't dotted all the I's. But if I'm lucky, I'll have 2 books out next year.
That's excellent. Excellent. Yeah, we'll be on the lookout for that. I'll poke Abrams and see what I can get in the middle on. Matthew, what about you?
I guess I'd just say that, if you need anything, go to your local library. We are doing everything we can across the country to come up with new ways to help out with anything you need, from homeschooling things to just making sure you have something fun to watch. Most libraries are super responsive. If there is any book you're looking for, any kind of information, just talk to whoever's closest to you, and I bet you they're going to figure out some way to get it to you.
Yeah, and make sure your local library has a Firestore, and if they don't,
definitely
tell them to get it.
We love requests for books.
Oh,
because we know someone's going to check it out then.
Yeah, there you go. Faith, anything to plug?
Ooh, I would plug my stuff, but it's not out yet. So I am going to plug that we've been talking a lot about like therapy and trauma. So if you are currently experiencing some sort of trauma or need help, please find someone that you can talk with. Also, just heads up, good thing to know, if you are currently experiencing trauma right now or are feeling triggers or symptoms related to that, you should definitely check out either EMDR or brain spotting as different therapeutic approaches that can help with that. So find somebody who's trained in that and they can help you hopefully start feeling better and heal from all of this trauma that's going on right now and with everyone else. So
those were EMDR and brain spotting, is that right?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, I'll have to give those a Google myself. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Again, from Pop Culture Classroom, from Denver Pop Culture Con, from the Excellence in Graphic Literature Awards. Thank you guys for joining and watching. We have some really exciting things in the work over at Pop Culture Classroom and Denver Pop Culture Con. So please, again, make sure you subscribe to our social media channels. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube page and our email list to be the first to know. Those of you that participated live today and asked questions, thank you so much. There's going to be so many more opportunities for you guys to participate in Pop Culture Classroom content coming up in the future. And as the plug from PCC, we are a nonprofit here in Denver. Most of our proceeds come from Denver Pop Culture Con, and as a result of COVID, we are not having one this year. So any donations that you can make to the nonprofit and the program to continue our educational work through graphic novel teaching guides, through workshops here in the Denver area, through virtual programs and programs just like this one, your donations would be very, very much appreciated. And on the screen immediately following this, you'll see a link where you can donate to Pop Culture Classroom. Again, thank you, cast. Thank you, everybody out there watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.